Did you watch The Little House on the Prairie growing up like I did? Well, today I'm in the little town on the prairie, Desmet, South Dakota, and I'm going to be visiting the final resting place of Charles and Caroline Ingalls. Good morning, everyone. I spent the night in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and have now made the 100-mile drive up to Desmet, South Dakota. Desmet is one of the places the Ingalls family lived over the years. And after spending a few minutes walking around town, I have now made my way to the town cemetery. If you don't know where you're going, the cemetery may be a little hard to find, but I got some great directions from one of the ladies at the Ingalls Homestead Visitor Center that I stopped at on the way into town. This cemetery is the final resting place of several members of the Ingalls family, which were featured in the Little House series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Once you arrive at the cemetery, there are signs directing you to the Ingalls family graves, which are located in the family plot in the far southwesternmost section of the cemetery. I have heard about the prairie wind all my life. This morning, I got to experience it firsthand. It's mid-morning and the wind is blowing at least 15 to 20 miles an hour out of the west, and it has made it almost impossible to do any type of on-site narration. Charles and Caroline Ingalls and their children came to Desmet in 1879. Charles took a job with the railroad, and the family lived in a railroad surveyor's house through the winter of 1879 and 1880. In the spring of 1880, the family moved to their homestead a couple miles east of town. The family lived and worked on the homestead during the spring, summer, and fall, but spent the winter months back in town. On August 25, 1885, Laura married Alonzo Wilder, and the couple lived on the homestead for a few years before moving into town. The rest of the family lived on the homestead until 1889. Then they moved for the final time into a home on 3rd Avenue here in Desmet. Charles and Caroline lived the rest of their lives in Desmet. Charles was a respected citizen of the town and held a number of elected positions, including Justice of the Peace. He also helped build the first Congregational Church, which he was a founding member. Charles Ingalls died from heart disease at the age of 66 on June 8, 1902. As a Mason, he was buried with Masonic rites here in the Desmet Cemetery. Following Charles's death, Caroline and her oldest daughter, Mary, continued to live in a house on 3rd Avenue, renting rooms for extra income. 22 years after the death of her husband, Caroline Ingalls died at the age of 84 on April 20th, 1924. Also resting here is Charles and Caroline's oldest daughter, Mary. When she was 14 years old, Mary took ill with a high fever, and while she would recover, the illness would take her eyesight. Mary would attend the Iowa Braille and Sight School in Benton, Iowa, where she was an excellent student, and graduated in 1889. After graduation, Mary returned to Desmet, where she lived with her parents. Back home, Mary was active in her community and in her church. Unlike the character in the TV series, Mary never married. Following the death of her mother, Mary lived with her sisters, Grace and Carrie, until she died at the age of 63 on October 17, 1928. Resting next to Mary is her younger sister, Carrie. As a teen, Carrie worked as a typesetter for the local newspaper here in Desmet. In 1912, at the age of 41, Carrie married a man named David Swainsey, who is best remembered for helping name Mount Rushmore. Like her sisters, Grace and Laura, Carrie suffered from diabetes, and the disease would claim her life on June 2, 1946. She was 75 years old. Also resting here in the Ingalls family plot is the infant son of Alonzo and Laura Ingalls Wilder. The child was born on July the 11th, 1889, and died 27 days later, on August 7th, 1889. Here's another look at the Ingalls family graves. The tall marker belongs to Charles, and the smaller markers are Caroline, baby Wilder, Mary, and on the end is Carrie. While the cemetery and the Ingalls graves were my primary purpose for visiting Desmet, I would certainly encourage anyone coming here to set aside some time and visit the Ingalls homestead and the Ingalls sites in downtown Desmet. The homestead is basically a living history museum where you can visit some of the historic buildings and walk around the tall grass prairie. It's located just east of the town and is well worth a stop. There are a number of sites in town to visit relating to the Ingalls family, including the surveyor's house where the Ingalls lived when they first arrived in the area in 1879, and the Brewster School, where Laura taught her first class. As you walk around town, you'll find that many of the buildings are original to the time when the Ingalls family lived here. Most have historical plaques affixed to them to explain their history. And finally, be sure to stop by the very impressive Veterans Memorial on the grounds of the Kingsbury County Courthouse. It's a wonderful tribute to our veterans. Now, it's time for me to end this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give me a thumbs up below. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If you have a favorite episode of the Little House on the Prairie TV show, be sure to leave me a comment. Now, it's time for me to head on down the road and see what's around the bend. So until next time, remember, life's a wonderful journey. Be sure to take time and enjoy it. Until then, I'll see you down the road. So long, everyone.